What is one lie you stuck with that you probably will never confess? Story 1. When I was 8, my Aunt Millie, who was 99, was sitting on the edge of a bed. I enthusiastically tried to show her how to jump on beds because it was so much fun. I jumped next to her, she flew off onto the floor, and I thought I killed her, so I ran away into my bed and pretended to be asleep. Story 2. No, I didn't slip and fall in the creek on the hike on our 5th grade camping trip. I tried to squat against a tree, slipped on dry leaves, and peed all over myself. Then I sat in the creek and caught up to everyone else so my story seemed more legit. You can't be the kid who peed on themselves on a class trip. No one will ever forget. Story 3. I hit my landlord's car, but granted, she parked in a no parking zone in front of our building and she parked 1 foot away from my running car, wintertime, had to go to work, so I just backed the hell up and drove off. My mom called me on my way to work to tell me she saw what I did and that she deserved it. She and I are the only ones who know. Story 4. When I was young, my parents left me home alone for an evening. I decided to take a fan outside, take off the front protective cage, and throw fruit at the blades. It was awesome. But then I threw a banana and I broke the fan. I put it back in the closet in such a way that if anybody were to even open the door, the fan would fall and break. The next day, I hear my mom from the other room, "Oh shoot, I broke the fan." Never gonna tell her. Story 5. I still feel bad about this. When I was 17, my dad let me borrow his awesome army green 99 Wrangler to take my date to prom. I was driving a crappy Volvo at the time. After the dance was over and I had dropped off my date, we had a good time. I was on cloud 9 and jamming out to the doors, not focusing on the road at all. As I was going down a hill near my house, I dropped my back right tire off the road on a soft shoulder and overcorrected trying to get back on the road. The Jeep did a 180, skidded off the other side of the road and smashed into a couple of trees. I was okay, but the Jeep was pretty much done for. I immediately called my dad and told him that a deer had run out in front of me and that I swerved to miss it, which caused the accident. He came to pick me up, and after he saw I was okay, he got very, very mad. He said he didn't believe my story and that if he found out I was lying to him, it wouldn't end well for me. FYI, my dad is very large, has a huge beard, and is a Vietnam vet. He's one scary dude when he gets pissed off. So I wussed out and stuck with my story. Things were tense between the two of us for a bit, but I guess he kind of let it go after a couple of weeks. What makes my lie so bad is that about a month later, my mom was coming down the same hill when a huge buck ran out into the side of her car at almost the same exact place where I had my accident. My dad took this as validation of my story and apologized profusely to me, saying that he wouldn't doubt my word again. 5 years later, and I still haven't told him the truth. Story 6. About 7 years ago, my friend somehow convinced me to attend an alcohol addiction meeting, court-mandated, with him. I had never been before and I didn't really know what to expect. My friend and I got there right as it was about to start and sat down in the back. The guy in charge of the meeting did his intro and then asked if anyone wanted to start us off. Silence. So he says, "How about that girl that just walked in with the big sunglasses?" I wore some big-ass sunglasses to be incognito at the meeting, which in turn, of course, had backfired. I had no idea what to do, so I introduced myself and started telling the most elaborate emotional story I could come up with about my life as an alcoholic and all the details leading me to rock bottom to where I was at today. I talked to her for about 5 minutes and had this older gentleman in tears next to me when I was done. My friend, a new friend who didn't know me too well, just stared at me all confused as hell and whispered, "Holy crap, are you serious?" No, of course I wasn't, but what the hell was I supposed to do? I was young and obviously a dumb. Then he asks for the next volunteer and ends up calling on another woman in the row in front of me. "Oh, I'm just observing," was all she said, and he moved on to someone else. WTF? I didn't know you could say that. Crap. At the end of the class, this girl comes up to me and gives me a big hug. She tells me she recognized me from high school and invites me to other meetings, which I turned down politely before running the hell out of there. I see that girl a few times a year, and she talks to me about my progress, and I ask her about hers. I remind her about how far she's come and tell her to stay strong when she's going through a rough time. I think I inadvertently became a role model for her and have been able to help her through some really rough patches. I think it's much better that she doesn't know, since she can just tell herself, "At least I'm not that girl," and instantly feel better. Story 7. Been waiting for a while to get this off my chest. In 4th grade, I had an elementary school teacher, I'll call him Mr. Lant, who was cool as could be. He had a rare skill in that he was able to teach you and make you care about what you were learning. We would play kickball and dodgeball at the end of the day. He was the only teacher who did that with his students. It also helped that Mr. Lant took a very personal interest in me. I remember I got a 4.0 GPA, not a big deal in fourth grade, which was the best I'd ever done in school. We had breakfast for all the kids on the honor roll, and he told my mom what a great kid I was. Well, it all turned downhill when we did our yearly Scholastic Books order. For those of you who are too young, Scholastic Books was a way for companies to make money off of you because you felt cool ordering books out of a magazine catalog. But you could also order science kits and other experiments. I ordered a geology kit that had all different kinds of rocks and probably some R.L. Stein books I would never read. Well, the months went by and we got our order in, and my package of rocks sucked. There were these crystal clear rocks, maybe they were quartz, and I didn't have a single one. But for some reason, Mr. Lant ordered the same geology kit, and his contained a multitude of crystal clear rocks. I don't know what possessed me, but I had to have them. I waited until after school when we were all hanging around the classroom showing off what books and kits we'd gotten, and I stole all of Mr. Lant's crystal clear rocks. I remember getting home and going to my bedroom to stroke the smooth surface of them like Gollum in Lord of the Rings. Mr. Lant was always my favorite teacher, and I felt horrible for doing this. He sat us all down and tried to get the crook to admit to stealing them. I looked around the class with a face that said, "Who did this?" even though I felt like a piece of crap inside. I felt so guilty I came home that day, flushed the rocks down the toilet, and never told anyone. I came back as an adult and tried to look him up so I could tell him the truth. It bothered me that much. But I found out he died in a four-wheeling accident on his property a few years back. I still feel bad about stealing the rocks from him and wish I'd been able to confess to him. Story 8. I lied to my now wife about why I was orphaned at 16. I said my parents, died in a car accident, but in reality, my brother took my mom and dad's life, then took his life afterwards. All the while, I was in the shower. I probably would have followed if I hadn't met her the next year. My brother was my best friend since we were born identical twins, but in grade school, we were both really antisocial and somehow I took it better than him. I try to remember him as the guy I confided in and him and me, but I don't know how I ever can. But as we grew up, he definitely got depressed, and in high school, he was bullied. I stood up for him the best I could, but in all honesty, the only reason I didn't get bullied as well was that I hung out with gang members who people didn't really mess with. As my brother went further and further into depression, he started to get reckless. He stole stuff and would come home in police cars constantly. 2 days before he did what he did, he told me he was thinking about suicide, and I thought I talked him out of it. The next day, he was extremely happy, and I thought things were looking up. We went for a drive and drank beer on the cliffside. He was my old brother again. March 3rd, 2006 was the day it happened. I don't know why I kept the date, but it sticks in my brain permanently. I woke up and said hello to him and my family, had breakfast, and then jumped in the shower. About 10 minutes in, I heard my dad's voice. He sounded scared, then I heard 4 loud pops. I ran out of the shower with shampoo in my hair, and I didn't even grab a towel. I don't even remember what I yelled. Now imagine this, a naked 16-year-old kid with shampoo in his hair, barely audible over his sobs, holding a phone and talking to a 911 operator. After all this happened, the government didn't even help me. I became homeless and resorted to pickpocketing. I met my now wife on the streets. She was another pickpocket. She, however, never even had a home. When she asked about my parents, I told her they died in a car accident, and then I became homeless. Long story short, we eventually got off the streets together, got married, and now we have a kid on the way. I will never tell her. Story 9. In college, for the first time ever, I told a girl I loved her. She told me she thought of me as a quote-unquote good friend. I acted real casual like, oh, no big deal, glad we're friends. But I freaked out inside and went to my car to drive around campus and not run into anyone I knew. I was driving pretty fast because I was upset. Red and blue lights came on behind me soon enough. I have no earthly idea why, but I floored it. I thought it might be campus security, so I decided to try to get off campus in the hopes they wouldn't follow. I hit 80 miles per hour as I flew off campus ground, but the lights didn't stop following me, but they were falling behind. At this point, I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to get arrested. And when the people on my floor find out, the girl will know how upset I was. It's amazing how embarrassment will trump logic in times like these. So I ended up flying through a red light at a major intersection at 90 plus, turned the corner and pulled into a KFC. This was like 2 a.m., so it was closed. Turned off the lights and ducked down. The car following me flew by. I had lost him. The relief lasted all of 2 minutes until I realized they certainly had my license plate and that they'd be waiting for me back at my dorm room to arrest me. Desperate, I decided I would pretend it wasn't me, act like my car had been stolen. I threw stuff around in the car to pretend someone was trying to find stuff to take. Then I took the valuable stuff, left the car unlocked, and jogged back to the dorm. Just as I was about to get off the elevator to my floor, I could hear a crowd of people in the public lounge area. It was almost 3 a.m., so I knew it had to be about me. I went up one more floor where there was a study room, hid my stuff, and then casually took the staircase back to my floor. About 15 of my friends, including the girl, were there along with 2 police officers. I acted completely surprised and asked what was going on. My friend said the cops were here because there had been an incident with my car. I showed real concern too. Oh my God, did something happen to my car? I was just studying in the lounge. The cops took me into the police station. An officer sat down with me, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Son, if you're lying about this just to get out of a ticket, we'll find out and it'll be much, much worse." But I was way too far in this to go back, and I thought that running from an officer then was probably worse than lying to one now, so I looked back at him and said, "No, I was studying. I hope you find my car." They brought in the guy who was chasing me. Turned out it was campus security just being a little overzealous and asked if he could identify me as the driver. He said, "No, it was dark and I couldn't see into the car." Wow, I'm lucky I didn't catch them. If they were car thieves, they might have had a gun. The police sent me home and that was that. The only hard part was that it took them 2 weeks to find my car, parked at the KFC with the doors unlocked. So I actually had to call my parents, tell them my car was stolen, and begin reporting it to State Farm. When they found the car, I got a last call from the officer to come by and pick up my car. He still looked at me like he didn't believe my story, but didn't say anything. 10 plus years later, when I was more confident, I hooked up with the girl after a reunion. I told her what really happened that night. The look on her face made the whole thing worth it. We're still good friends to this day. Story 10. I stole my dad's engraved pen. More than 10 years ago, I used my dad's engraved pen and forgot to return it to the coffee table when I was done. Both my parents accused me of having it, and I was irritated and denied having it. This pen was dark blue with gold writing that my mom had given him. It was used for grown-up serious things like writing checks and signing cards. I could probably smuggle it back to my parents' house, but I don't think I will. I've judged me so hard for taking that pen and denying having it. Story 11. The piece of writing I've gotten the most praise for, having won contests with, got published, is plagiarized. I found it online, printed it out, and someone found it and insisted that it was the best thing I'd ever written without bothering to ask me if I'd actually written it. I was too shy and nervous to speak up and correct them until it was far, far too late. Nobody will ever find out because the real author is dead and his site doesn't even exist on the Wayback Machine. Story 12. In 2nd grade, I got attacked by a golden lab tied in a parking lot after I dropped my Super Ball and went to get it back. The dog was usually friendly and I had petted it a few times when the owner was out. But when I reached to take the ball, the dog grabbed my wrist and bit me pretty hard. I was able to get away with some injuries. I didn't want the dog to get in trouble, so I threw myself to the ground and scraped my knees, my other wrist, and my chin. Threw sand and gravel in. It looked like I did trip and had a bad fall, and the bite was looking as if I had hit sharp rocks. The dog lived a nice long life, but I got in so much trouble for being clumsy and ripping my clothes. My family was pretty abusive, and I knew very well what was going to happen to me. Still didn't want the dog to be punished. Story 13. I'm 30 years old, work in advertising, am pretty successful, senior manager level, make $80,000 plus annually, and I never graduated from college. I was a smart kid, but I was just not prepared for going to school away from home and having to be responsible. I basically skipped class all the time, partied hard, and ended up dropping my classes most of the 9 semesters I was in undergrad. I would forge my semester grades, so my parents had no idea. Anyways, after about 4.5 years, my parents were obviously expecting me to graduate. So I told them that I did, but that I wasn't going to walk. I went to a huge state school, so it was believable that I didn't want to sit through a long graduation ceremony. I was able to get an interview at a small advertising agency right after I graduated, and they didn't ask to see my transcript, so I was able to accept their job offer. Now, 8 years later, I've worked at 2 other companies, both of which are small companies that don't do background checks. When I apply for jobs now, I always do small, privately owned agencies so that I don't run the risk of having to go through a background check. I had one scare a few years ago when I was offered a job. I put in my 2 weeks notice at my old job, and then the new company decided to do a background check, which I obviously failed, so then I had to go back to my old company and say, "Just kidding, I'm staying." Awkward. Only 2 people know, a friend and an ex-BF. I haven't told my husband. I'm scared that I'll get blackout drunk one night and tell him. He would definitely not be cool with it. In hindsight, I wish I would have been more serious about school so I wouldn't have to live this lie, but I also think it's kind of awesome that I've been able to be so successful without a college degree. Story 14. I had a child when I was young and put him up for adoption. The courts require you to post an ad in the paper to give the biological father a chance at claiming his parental rights. Well, I was heavily into drinking and generally irresponsible, death wish style living when I got pregnant, and his father, along with his father's entire family, was and still is an abusive user. When the time came to write the affidavit of paternity for the adoption, I claimed I slept with a whole bunch of guys and didn't know who the father was. I was told I needed to place an ad in the paper listing potential guys, and I just said I didn't even ask names. I was a drunk party favor. Long story short, I know who the father is. I keep tabs on him. I told him I had miscarried. My son is better off without this guy. I'm sure I'll get lots of downvotes for this too, but whatever. Story 15. Last year, I did a South African literature course, and the teacher asked, "Hey, has anybody been to South Africa?" I wasn't listening, and for some stupid freaking reason, I was like, "Oh yeah, I totally have." Everyone then exploded and was like, "OMG, so cool, tell us about it." Then they all kept asking me so much stuff about South Africa and what I did there that I went home and Googled the crap out of South Africa. I mean, I street viewed everything, so I could believably make up stuff because there was no way I could deny it now. And man, the most elaborate thing I have ever done. It would have been less effort to just literally go to South Africa itself. Story 16. I've convinced all of my friends, all of them, that I have no sense of smell. The only people who know that I can are my immediate family. I don't make a big deal about it, but I think it's too late to go back on it now. Story 17. That I lost my virginity to my first boyfriend at 16. I actually lost it about 4 years earlier when I was assaulted on a staircase. Yikes, that's depressing as hell, but I'm taking it to the grave. I guess it feels sort of good to have let that one out, even if it gets buried. Story 18. I moved to the Boston area because of a girl. To my family and most of the world, I moved for a job and because I've wanted to be in or near Boston for years. Story 19. I put gin in my grandma's Sonic slushies when she was dying from cancer. No one in the family would let her drink. She was dying. I wanted her to be happy. She loved gin.